패널 디스커션을 시작하도록 하겠습니다. Okay, so because we have more time than we expected, so I'll ask several prepared questions to you, and I'll get the questions from the audiences as well. Is it okay with you guys? Sure. Got it. Okay, my first question is, how did you first get excited about blockchain games, and what was your motivation on that?
I feel like I answered this already in my presentation. Maybe Yat, you want to go?
Well, I did the same. We both said CryptoKitties, right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I can say even from before that, my interest in trading games and trading game assets has been there for a really, really long time. So I actually traded, for example, Diablo 3, even when the Real Money Auction House was released. I love that. I know a lot of people actually didn't like that. And Diablo 2 as well, so traded a lot of those type of items. So I feel like it was a very natural fit for me to just start loving NFTs and trading of game items pretty fast.
I discovered blockchain game and through CryptoKitties, like pretty much everyone in the space. But as I mentioned in our presentation, I've been in the user-generated content space for 7 years with this franchise, The Sandbox. And for us, main benefits that blockchain is bringing, essentially this true ownership of the user creation, made easily a lot of sense, since we could see people devote themselves, invest time and effort to create amazing content and never been properly retributed or being able to take the value out of our previous platform and start monetizing anywhere else. So when the idea of allowing that finally through decentralization came, that's where it became really excited for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think we share the same. It's CryptoKitties, right? But I think maybe just to add on this one, CryptoKitties showed us about digital scarcity, but the discovery that content could become a platform and actually change the way we discover content, I think that's something that really, in anyone who's an indie game developer, is going to feel sort of some hope, because right now they can't be discovered. And this is kind of why we're extra excited about this potential.
So to speak about the scarcity of the blockchain games, personally, do you guys own crypto assets like blockchain game items or the cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, I have. I mean, yeah, I have multiple cats and also crypto MLBs. And some other, now some cheese wizards actually, which recently released. So I think everyone needs some NFTs in their wallet, because as I mentioned, it's the start of your like virtual identity, the way I see it. So this is history. And I even have some worthless ones from failed ICOs, which I will not sell, but just keep as memories for when I was like mementos. So.
So yeah, I own like a couple of CryptoKitties, a couple of Axies, more recently a Mystic one, Cheese Wizard, etc. I don't stream usually, but I started to post on Twitter short videos on when I actually buy them, so like I can share the overall experience of buying it with people in my network. And I found out like the more I speak and evangelize about NFT, the more in my network people who were not interested to blockchain, they get interested into it. So I think the effort is paying off. And I'm also doing that internally with all my team, where I give them just maybe 0.1, 0.2 Ether, like less than $50. And I tell them, okay, buy a CryptoKitty, buy an Axie. And they love the experience. So that's, I think, part of it.
They probably love the experience of owning it, not maybe the experience of setting up the wallet, right? So that's probably a little harder.
Yes, I know the issue.
I think, so, I mean, other than the sort of mandatory CryptoKitties, I have to buy some Axie Infinities, indeed. But I think the thing, what I would look at, we have made some of our own first NFTs with our existing games as well, like Stargirl, as we're experimenting, scouring through OpenSea. I actually, I think the story is when we first launched a nonsense NFT just to try it out on OpenSea, we sold like 20 ETH worth of stuff, and we're like, why would someone buy this? Right? That doesn't make sense. There's no game, there's no background, nothing. Why would you buy an NFT of an item that doesn't even have a white paper or a story. And I actually think, to your point about the worthless NFTs, there is a market for being first, right? You are at an early adopter stage. You know there's only 20 of them. It may be worthless, but it is one of the very first NFTs ever made. And so that aspect, so basically what I'm saying is you should all think about buying lots of NFTs right now.
Don't miss, be first. Remember that.
And as I mentioned in my presentation, the blockchain games can be categorized into two types. So one has its own tokens and not. So what are your thoughts on blockchain games that release their own tokens and those which do not?
Maybe you can go first.
Sure. Well, we're really in an early stage of blockchain gaming, so no one really knows what works or what not. It's too early to just base the future on the success of one or few existing games. I think each game has to design its own gameplay, game mechanics, and think about whether adding a token of their own and then build a good token economy on top of it makes sense or not for the purpose of their game. If it's just about adding a token for the sake of adding a token and it has no utility or the token appreciation will decrease and it will not make revenue. But in our case, controlling the supply of sand, making sure that it's going to be in demand through the sale of our content, and it has more utility than just a mean of payment, like transaction, it does make sense, and that's a choice we took.
Yeah, so for our sake, I was actually very much against having our own token for a very long time. Just because I believe firmly that most ERC20s are useless tokens. People have created useless shit for way too long. And the things that we needed to do was, as Sebastien is saying, create a really solid ecosystem around this type of token. So for our sake, I didn't mention it in my presentation, but we also have a Luna token which is coming, which is going to fuel the in-game ecosystem, basically allowing people to earn this Luna token when they're playing the game, and you can then stake the Luna token to participate in the value that is being created by the network. And I think these kind of fundamental strategies are important if you are going to create your own token. I don't necessarily believe in having a stable currency, because you have, for example, DAI that you can use for that, but what you need is to create demand for the token that you are having in your own ecosystem. And that is not an easy task. So I think that the people who have created a token ecosystem right now, it's really hard. You need to spend a lot of time thinking about it, and then you can do it in a good way.
Yeah, so I think in general, if you consider doing a token in your game, one of the things you also have to consider is the regulatory framework. Right? So doing a token, even though it's a utility token in a game, doesn't mean that it is okay to do it, because the regulators may look at it and say, well, we think this could be a security token. An example in the US, if you issue a token but the utility is not established, they will consider that a security token because it becomes speculative in nature. Right? Now that depends on which country you do it. Right? So those are aspects. So actually launching a project with a security token, so with a utility token, that has not yet got an actual utility may put your project even at risk, potentially, just because regulators might come all over it. That's one aspect. But the other thing is, I would say is that every game has a different economy. Whether you choose to make a token or not, they're not directly interoperable, right, in the terms of a currency. So, we don't believe in one currency fits all, because like in Sandbox, there's a particular utility. With Axie, there's a particular utility. But there will be a place where the two tokens can exchange. So I do think in a framework where the regulatory framework is well established, which it isn't at the moment, I think in the future, we will have thousands of tokens, right? Because every game can be a token and can be exchangeable, balanced in the way that makes sense for their particular game economy.
Some blockchain games create their own NFT marketplace inside of the game. On the other hand, there are shared marketplaces like OpenSea. So what is your prospect on these two different marketplaces?
Maybe I'll start first, right? And we do, yeah. So I think there's many marketplaces to look at. Generally speaking, once you own the NFT, it can travel anywhere around, and that's the point. However, I think this was a point made earlier, is that when you do the marketplace inside your own game, you give it an experience that is unique, right? You can capture the marketplace experience that makes sense for the gameplay you have in mind. Which means also that when you do a marketplace, it doesn't have to look like a marketplace, right? It could be, inside a treasure chest. It could be in a menu. It doesn't really matter, right? Every game will have its different flavor. Now, where third-party marketplaces are really important is it's not just like with Amazon today in the physical world, you sometimes list your product on Amazon, not because you want to sell more on Amazon, but you want to be discovered. Because there's an audience there already that's buying, right? So, just like with the Formula One auction, yes, we did obviously do a lot of promotion to put on our marketplace, but they got a lot of attention on OpenSea as well, because all the other people on OpenSea were looking at this crazy car and saying, what is going on here? And it in itself becomes an event. So I think more marketplaces is part of the education.
Well, pretty much everything is said. Marketplace are acting as a new discovery platform. More specifically to the Sandbox project, because we are user-generated content, it was important to be our primary marketplace because that's where all the tokenization happens. So unlike some other blockchain game, and for example Axie Infinity right now, not all the tokens are being made by the game developer. In our case, it's the user, so we have to provide a user flow and experience where it's very easy and we can control all the different aspects of the experience to upload your content and make it a token.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I believe, as has been stated here, that content is king. And for that specific reason, I believe that it could be hard for OpenSea and other marketplaces to defend a common marketplace just because the users will go to the games and the games can actually capture other verticals. So if you're a game and have a lot of users who are using your game, you can then start acting as a distribution platform for other similar games. So they can even use your own platform. So, and at that point you come and say, okay, well, what can actually OpenSea and other marketplaces provide? Let's say that they are not specialized in gaming. They are specialized in being a marketplace for 100,000 million different things. Well, maybe they don't fit your niche. Maybe they don't have the users that you do, right? So as gaming specialists, we can actually provide an ecosystem for gamers, right? And then we can allow other games, for example, to use our marketplace in the future.
But maybe to add to this point, do you think then that it makes sense to put NFTs in your marketplace that are not interoperable with the Axie universe?
That could be. I mean, so from my perspective, it's all going to be about who do we actually want to work with in the future. So I believe in curation. And I believe that curation is going to be so important in a world where everyone has so many choices. So if we can act as curators and make kind of a decision for our players and say that, yes, we can be not a launchpad, but say that this is a game that we put our stamp of approval on, then we can potentially even do other listings for them, right? Because it's all about controlling the users, or having, not controlling is a bad word, but actually having the users using your platform.
Right. So maybe I think definitely agree that there will be other NFTs in our own marketplaces. I do think, however, to add value to the community, it should be an NFT that is interoperable within the same universe.
Yeah,
then it's more meaningful to the consumer.
Of course. I mean, that's a thing. But so what I see is that even if things don't have direct value in your own world, it could just be a specific kind of brand or anything, a small thing, right? Anything that gives additional value to the users, well, they're going to be gobbling that up. They love that. Anything that makes you feel special. It's the social proof. That's all what it's about.
And what are some of the technical or non-technical obstacles you have faced when you build the game on top of the blockchain?
Yeah, so I mentioned Ethereum, and I would say that from Axie, we started building very early on in 2018. We built our game based on the limitations of Ethereum. That's why you needed to select your team. Your opponent did the same. You send a gas transaction, and well, it's just a disaster. It doesn't work to actually build a game based on the Ethereum limitations. So you kind of need what we think is use a more hybrid approach. It turns out the users don't really care that much about decentralization, but that's what we have to do as game developers, take kind of a proactive approach there and let them have a good user experience while still maintaining enough decentralization and probably even going more into a decentralized aspect in the future. So that's what we have as our experience.
I think in a general way, coming from a mobile gaming space, adding blockchain to the overall technical stack is already quite a challenge by itself due to the youth of the environment and the development tools, and it's an extra layer of development that you put on top of it. More specifically, the development of the implementation of ERC 1155, since it's not yet a standard, and it's been submitted, rejected, and it's still pending approval from the community. And even though we are one of the top 3 contributors on it, it takes a lot of time and energy from the own focus of building our platform and game that we dedicate to the community. So in a sense it's great, but on the other side then it's less time you spend on your own product. So I think it's one of the challenges. Maybe not a hurdle, but definitely a challenge.
So I think outside of the technical challenges which have been discussed, I think the UX experience and onboarding people who have made games but not blockchain games is really a paradigm shift in designing a game, right? So you're completely changing the environment. You're thinking of a game normally where you can issue as many items as you want. Scarcity is not part of your original design. Adding sort of co-value, right, is not part of the design. And now they have to think about that. When we were thinking about the auction for the very first one, the traditional game designers were like, well, we should basically expect maybe $10 or $20 or $30 because they were thinking in traditional game models, right? And while we did not expect $100,000, we were hoping for tens of thousands of dollars, right? Because of the fact that it was Formula One. And so what are you selling? You're not actually now selling sort of mass items anymore, right? You've gone from selling, mass consumer goods into special rare items. So you're thinking, you're designing, has to put that into a change. That has actually been our biggest challenge. Getting a game designer who's worked on games all their life in a certain sort of top-down way and asking them essentially to change that. That has been one of our biggest challenges.
Actually, I would just like to add that Axie Infinity, we're not traditional game designers. We actually never created a game before, which I think is an advantage in this point because everything that we do has been focused on how we can utilize the blockchain to our advantage. And it turns out that when we see traditional game companies, studios coming into the space, they are really struggling because they aren't used to thinking in these like crypto ways. Pretty much like you need to align the incentives and think very much about the economical implications of everything that you do. Because if you fail and issue too many tokens, well, everything is useless. It's just a simple economic ecosystem.
That was my last question that I prepared. So I'm going to get questions from the audiences right now. If you have questions, please raise your hand.
Hi, so my question is about interoperability. So I think that there's 2 ways that it could work. You either have the item that's moving, depreciate in value, or you have the item maintaining value. But I think that this will piss off either of the gamers because if you depreciate the value of the item, then the person will not move their game to another game because it's not going to have much value. But if you maintain the value of the item, let's say, for example, in Gods Unchained, the item Hyperion will just lose its value and people who are actually early adapters will be pretty pissed off. And also, you talked about pay to earn. That will also kind of lose its value because now we have a lot more people who's competing for that spot, and there's this imbalance of item values. So how would you kind of navigate that, especially from your developing experience?
Maybe I can ask this question. You're saying that because there's interoperability, the item will lose value?
Yeah, so I guess it's the gamer's decision because you talked about how the gamers will make the game items to bring the gamers in. about how the game
company,
developers.
the game developer, yes.
Yeah, so it's really the game developer's choice of whether they're going to depreciate the values item or maintain the values item. But if there's like a lot of legendary items flowing into one game, they makes the game developer of the original game in a really tough situation.
So I mean, others will have a comment, but my first comment on this one is that the item isn't theirs, right? Means that the scarcity of that item is not their decision, so they can't replicate it. Even if they choose to take the Hyperion card and make it worth very little inside their game, that doesn't change the fact that it is the only Hyperion card out there that has a certain value, right? Now, my view is that if I'm a game developer and I'm going to use a super expensive item, is it in my interest to devalue it, or is it in my interest to actually make it more valuable so that that community joins, right? So the value of the community is, I want the Gods Unchained community, in this case, to come play my game. I don't want to piss them off, right? That's why I'm doing it, right? So it's a little bit like, you know, how do I bring in the Ferrari community? Certainly not by making them feel like a Ferrari is a Fiat, even though they're the same company, right? But you want to make sure that the experience is good. Then you get the community. If the experience is bad, they won't go. And the game developer will have made effort to integrate an item that nobody will go to. So we think that is naturally balancing each other out because the incentives are aligned.
Yeah, I agree with him there, but I would also like to add that what's interesting is, from a game developer's perspective, is that you can even do hostile takeovers of other games' communities. So by saying that is, let's say, for example, in Axie Infinity, if we want to accept Generation 0 cats, for example, and allow people to pay with them in our game and then burn them, we're effectively reducing the supply of cats, right? And we're also getting the players into our game who are paying players, who are showing that they are, for example, have an interest in CryptoKitties, right? If we actually add value to their cats or Gods Unchained cats, from my perspective, we are increasing the value of their asset because it can be used in multiple ecosystems. So from Axie's perspective, we get a lot of questions asked, oh, can you add support for our item in your ecosystem? And we're kind of not doing that so much yet because it's a pretty big decision, right? Because these assets, a lot of our players, they spend a lot of money in the game. And if we say that this is worth something wrong, for example, well, then that's also probably going to destroy for that opposing game, right? So it's a very hard decision. But I think in general, everything that adds interoperability usually adds value if you do it correctly.
Yeah, I was not going to use the word like hostile takeover, but more like it was a user acquisition strategy that can be, I think, either built in a way that it's still collaborative and friendly, where it's a win-win for all the developers in the space, or it can be a bit more aggressive, like just Alex described. I think it's also part of accepting the idea of decentralization and that the value is no longer in the hand of a central entity, which is a game developer, but it's put in the hands of the users, and users will decide how they appreciate that value. And if they don't like it, they'll start selling it on secondary marketplaces. And if no one wants to buy those items because there's no longer a utility, then yes, probably it will decrease in value. But if smart game developers comes with ideas like this, and I've seen it, I've seen games that start using very low priced CryptoKitties that had no specific attributes and turn them into much more valuable content in their own game, and it works pretty well. Or like Alex described, the fact of you can burn some of the token to reduce the scarcity even more, and then increase probably the valuation of those. So it's all an open world. I wouldn't say a far west, but it's exciting in a sense.
So I should add, we don't do that in Axie, just to be 100% clear. But what we see is that players or other kind of games, they want to use Axie assets in their games. And our response is always the same. If you want to use Axies in your game, I mean, feel free to add value to them. We're not necessarily going to condone that. We're not going to say anything about it unless we actually approve of what you're doing. If we think that's fine, then yeah, we're going to share with our community because you are providing value for our players, right? But if you do it in a bad way, we're just going to say, well, okay, fine, you do your thing, but you're not going to get anything kind of free from us.
First, thank you for the three great presentations. And personally, as a gamer, I'm really interested in all the blockchain work in the game business. But as Mr. Yatse also pointed out in his presentation or a panel discussion about regulatory decisions from the regulators, and as for any game developers or teams in Korea, and this is also a question for Mr. Ethan Kim, actively working in Korea, every game that wants to publish and do business in Korea has to go through the game rating committee and get rated as like a PEGI, as in movies and entertainment. And in regulatory wise, have you been facing any regulation regarding blockchain-based gaming business? Because in Korea right now, the game rating committee isn't giving any ratings out that for games that have anything to do with blockchain. I think just for the sake of regulating blockchain right now. So for doing business in Korea or either at your home country, have you faced any regulation like this, or how do you see the regulation will go out?
I can answer this one first. So I think regulation first are here not to be just annoying by nature, but seeing on the long term, they are here to protect the users, and generally they play in favor of the mass. And more specifically to the sandbox, we've incorporated in Malta, and we decided to have a good, worthy regulatory framework around our token and our NFTs, because playing a long term that brings more trustability from the people and the investor as well, and all the partners in the space, the exchange later on, etc., because they know we are regulated, so they can trust that what we are doing it in a proper way, that we are not claiming fake numbers, whatever. And it seems hard. I would say it's a higher hurdle to barry. It adds legal cost, but the long-term play is much better. And we chose Malta versus, I don't know, some Cayman, Iceland, etc., which just by saying the name, you already smile and you have this idea of, is it such trustable business behind? So I think it worked for us.
Maybe to add on that, so we're public in Australia, and definitely there are, the ASIC, which is the regulator there, has gone through our documents and has reviewed it and has blessed it. So there are ways and there are jurisdictions outside of Malta and Gibraltar that will also be okay with blockchain and tokens. The key distinction being utility versus security tokens, right? If there is a utility, and also who is the initial buyer of the utility, then a utility token, then that matters as well, right? Because there's also dual levels. One of them is maybe initially when you sell it to a sophisticated investor, then that's okay. But when you start selling it to the public, or the public is able to buy those tokens, that's when you have additional concerns as well, because there's buyer protections and SFC rules related to regular consumers, right? Which is a distinction. So we are okay to sell, even with equity, with shares, you can sell shares to a sophisticated investor, that's fine. But you can't necessarily sell the shares to the man on the street. For that, you need to be regulated. So it's important to make sure you have the distinction. Now, there is legal cost, of course, and there seems more overhead. But the way that we think of it is, when you make a game that's on the blockchain, you're making a decision that this is going to be permanent, right? Whether it works out or not is a different story. But you're making a decision that this is a product that will last forever because it's on the blockchain. So the initial work that you're doing to make it regulatory and approved is really just a framework to give it the long-term benefit, as far as we see.
Yeah, so from Axie's perspective, being very early adopters in the space, we believe in following best practices. And we have been seeing to CryptoKitties as leaders of the space, following some of their leads. But what I think is that there's still too much unclarity. Like, it's not clear enough what is best practices and what isn't. So we are trying the best we can, but I would be lying if I said that everything was 100% clear. So that's just the way it is. And legal fees, of course, are a concern. But I mean, it's as Yat said, if you're going to make something that's going to last for the future, things need to be transparent. You need to have the integrity and show people that, yes, this is the way we do business, and this is the way we do business long term.
Another questions? 한국말로 여쭤보셔도 됩니다. 다 리시버가 있어서요. One of the biggest blockchain gaming promise is that allowing users trade their items right away, and there are some criticism around it, I believe. And one is that actually it destroys the initial purpose or motive of gamers, and I don't personally believe that claim, but what I heard is that that's what happened to Diablo 3 when they applied cash auction to the game. User actually complained a lot because it destroyed their motive. And second criticism around it is that allowing trading of items, it can be essentially treated as a gambling, especially when the way user earn item is controlled by randomness. So what do you guys think about that?
So when it comes to the trading aspect of it, I think everything comes down to how you actually design the game. So inherently having free trading of items isn't that bad if you have no utility to the items, because then it's just skins like Dota 2, for example. The problem actually becomes when you have a game that's being designed from the beginning where you have a progress-based gameplay. So once you get to the end goal, that's kind of it. So if you then allow players to purchase themselves to the end goal, that's a pretty bad thing. And in Diablo 3, everything is about beating monsters, PvE type of enemies. And so once you get there, the game is done. Pretty much, you can grind different levels. But if you have a PvP type of a component as well, and then can say that, let's say once you get to the maximum level, then this is where there's fair competition. The players who have the most legendary item, who want to participate in the skin game, whatever you want to call it, where they want to have real valuable assets, they can purchase up that way. But there needs to be a common ground where there is warfare and where there is no real pay to win. Other than that, I also believe in letting players kind of purchase their way up, because that's just the way the real world works. If you're making a virtual world, it should echo how the real world is as well. And the fact is that if you work hard in the real world, you can go up. And I think that's very attractive for a lot of gamers as well. And I think that's where we are going to see a lot of viral growth once true gamers start realizing that, hey, I can actually monetize my time and still have a significant amount of fun. So, yeah, I guess.
So I think first, when it comes to marketplaces and trading, I think it has to do with, in our view, how much value does a user get out of doing that trade. So when you retroactively put a trading element into a subscription game, as in Diablo, first of all, it does feel a little bit like a money grab, right? You're already getting a monthly fee from me, and now you want me to pay more, right? So that's kind of one element of that. Now, if, however, you know that you can make money from the game itself, that might change your perspective. I'll give you a good example. When we first did our deal with HTC to distribute CryptoKitties on their Exodus phone, and of course the U12, the earlier generation, they wanted to make sure that the phone came with at least 2 kitties. So we said, okay, sure, because without 2 kitties, you can't breed. So we said, sure, we did the math, and we said, that'll cost you $15 per phone. And they're like, what, right? I have to pay $15 per phone, and we're shipping like 10,000 phones. That's a lot of money, right? You know, my margin is like nothing. Well, you know, you have to figure it out, because we couldn't just make the kitty. Even though they understood it, still we're like, wait, I can't just give you a kitty. I don't have, I don't have those kitties in reserve. I got to go buy them in the market and then give them to you, and we think it's roughly $15 for a pair, right? So that's the point, right? If the developer themselves has to dip into the marketplace to buy from the community as well, then it's a fair marketplace. But if I am a developer, like in the case of Diablo, it's not fair at all, or World of Warcraft when they did their auction house, because you know what? I want to make money, let me just issue 1,000 more swords. That's like the Venezuelan economy. Let's just issue some coin. And we know how that turned out, right? So in the question on gambling, so when you deal with real money items, yes, there is something we do need to look out, especially with loot boxes. And there's laws, and right now, people are looking at loot box regulation as well. That's something that's happening. However, there is a clear distinction between sort of environmental gambling versus peer-to-peer. So if I'm playing against you, or I'm betting against you, but it's peer-to-peer, then that is okay, right? So there are ways around it depending on how you design the game mechanism. And I do think that regulation will catch up to the point where we have to be conscious of it, but as long as we are aware of it, we can design games around it. Like for instance, P2P betting is okay, but you don't want to, and you don't want a bookie, and you don't want to have all these elements around it, which you maybe can't control, but at least you are not the one facilitating it.
Something I like to add to those two previous answers is that when we are developing blockchain games, we have to write smart contracts, and those smart contracts are public. So you can look at the source code. We have audit for the security, but we make them available for everyone to read and figure out, like, can we actually cheat our users? And usually, if that's the case, the community will find out very quickly that that's something unfair, and it's provable thanks to the blockchain. So blockchain adds more transparency, hopefully more trust as well. And if it's not in your game design and gameplay mechanics that gambling is inherent to the trading of the items between the players, then I don't see why it would be unfair in that. In those conditions.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Damien, and I'm from the iTime Games on Korean-based blockchain game project. And my question is, as you did the presentation, Yatsu, about the content is the king and the distribution is the queen. And this is actually our motto of our project. But my question is that since you guys are really focused on the content itself, I'm sure there are some problems with putting the games on Google Play Store and the App Store. And when I was looking at your presentation, Alex, your application was specifically on the iPhone. So how are you managing to do it? Are you trying to put your games on the App Store, totally free, but have to access the trading form on the different site? Oh, okay, you already answered.
Yeah. So first of all, I am familiar with Item. I actually read your white paper the other day, so it's nice for you to be here. But when it comes to the whole, where are you going to distribute your application? I think we're still very early. Like the jury is still out on how the monetization or how the revenue will be shared. I mean, we can do it through smart contracts quite easily, but I think the biggest problem is that these guys are not really ready yet to start accepting it. So for us, I mean, the application that we have now on iOS is just a test flight type of application where it's very free to play. You connect with your email, and then you get to see the amount of Axies that you have in your wallet, which is also tied to email, right? So that's one way that we can kind of move away from how they are doing it. But I mean, I don't have the answer for you right now. I wish I did. That would be great. But perhaps Yato or someone else has.
I can comment. On the Apple Store and Google Play Store specific rules. So what they will forbid specifically is not the use of the cryptocurrency. It's more the fact that you can purchase any digital content or without using their in-app purchase libraries. So one way to go around it is to actually use a centralized login where you can use the mobile platform to connect to your account and see the content you've purchased from another place, like a website. What you cannot do from the mobile app is to prompt the users to buy the content, even once they are logged in. You cannot even try to get them to your website or marketplace. They are not that stupid, and they will not get their 30% cut there. So that's not specifically inherent to blockchain. Actually, that's also like how a lot of newspaper, magazine, Netflix, Spotify, etc. are doing it.
Yeah, so the question you ask is something that we've been wrangling with, of course, and the culmination of it was an experimental app that we launched, I think 3 or 4 months ago, called Wallet Pet. You can download it right now on the App Store globally. We didn't make lots of news around it because it is blockchain and crypto, and we did, however, get Apple's approval to get it released. So it might possibly be one of the few, if not only, officially approved sort of quasi mini games in that area. Now, to Seb's point, you can't purchase anything with it, and we don't allow you to go somewhere and take you into an outside link. It does have an embedded wallet, and it has essentially kind of like a sort of crypto homepage kind of system. It's not great. It was simply there to experiment to see how Apple and Google would take it. So the short answer is it is possible, but you just need to be able to work with them. And in this particular case, we had quite a bit of communication with them as well in terms of what may or may not work. It was in the review queue for almost 4 months. So that just gives you an idea. But it is a new space where I think it will become more interesting in the midterm when blockchain becomes much more standard. Is, do we expect that the platforms will want to take a cut on the transaction revenues generated from within the app? Because now they can measure it as well. And if that framework happens, yes, they'll take a cut. On the other hand, at that point, I think it'll be open to everyone.
Yeah, so I just want to add that I think if we try to do something specifically with Axie, like you guys did, we would probably get removed pretty fast, just because we have so much volume on our other marketplace, right? So at that point, if you start getting noticed, I would assume that it would get worse. But I'm not sure, of course, as my simply speculation. I don't want to gamble with something like that quite yet. In this particular case, I believe in being cautious rather than like very aggressive. Usually I am the other way. But it's mostly because some chances you probably won't. If you get banned, it's just not a good thing to get.
Maybe we'll find decentralized app store and get invested.
Well, the crypto wallets for me are, and the marketplace are those new app stores for the dApps. So,
last question.
저는 한글로 해도 되죠. 예. 하나 좀 여쭤보고 싶은 게 사실은 저희가 일반적인 게임을 저도 계속해서 개발을 해왔던 사람인데 일반적인 게임 같은 경우는 저희가 피에머니를 쓰기 때문에 결제를 하는 데 있어서 크게 거부감이 없고 어느 정도 글로벌로 하더라도 환율을 하는 영향이 크지 않기 때문에 상관이 없는데 사실 저희 블록체인 게임의 가장 큰 맹점 중에 하나가 이 블록체인의 가치에 따라서 사실은 아이템의 가치의 변동성이 너무 커지기 때문에 그게 1차적으로다가 변동성이 너무 커지는 부분들에 대해서 좀 어떤 식으로다가 좀 생각을 하고 계획을 하시는지, 그리고 2차적으로다가 저희가 만약에 말씀하신 것처럼 토큰을 발행하시기도 하는데 토큰을 발행하게 되면 거기에서는 또다시 한 번 더 변동성이 강해지고, 그리고 많이들 아시겠지만 실질적으로 ICO를 하거나 아니면 정부 규제 당국에서도 실제로 이 변동성에 대해서 반응이 되게 부정적인 반응들, 뭐 좋을 때만 좋지 사실은 대부분이 좀 부정적인 반응들이 많은데 그게 실제 게임 유저들한테도 그 토큰을 많이 게임에서 발행을 했는데 사용을 하더라도 그 가치가 변동되는 게 사실 게임 자체의 문제가 아니라고 하더라도 변동성이 커질 때 거부감들이 많을 수가 있는데 그런 자체적으로 다 발행하시는 토큰에 대해서도 좀 이런 부분들은 어떤 식으로 다 계획을 하고 고민을 하고 계신지 좀 궁금합니다.
short answer. I think it's something we have to accommodate with. First, it's part of the dynamics of the blockchain as it is now. Like so, there's no forces we can go against how the market of blockchain and how cryptocurrency are evolving. That's also one decision. One of the reasons we decided to have our own cryptocurrency cent, so we can control a little bit more, hopefully, the supply, demand, and those fluctuations around it, and try to have, I would say, a more stable price point for the users, latecomers, to the platform once mass adoption is here. Right now, seeing the usage on some dApps like Exinfinity and CryptoKitties, it didn't seem to be such a barrier to the users to actually buy NFTs and increase the trading volume of those tokens. So it's just how much risk and volatility each individual is able to take when they are making those decisions to buy the tokens or sell them to trade, I think.
So I think actually it's a lot about liquidity in the market. So what a lot of players are scared of is if you buy something, you are unable to sell it, and you watch the value depreciate until it's almost nothing. So I think volatility is natural in an emerging space. As things kind of more stabilizes, as things get more normalized, we will see kind of a flat line a little bit. But it's like Bitcoin and any other kind of cryptocurrency at the beginning. Since there are so few people involved, and once more people kind of find the games, the price will likely go up and then kind of go down again if it goes the other way, of course. So it's as Seb said, like it's about also managing the expectations of the user, right? So if you promise someone that they're going to make money playing your game, you're doing it wrong. You have to be pretty clear at the beginning that yes, this has some financial risk. It can potentially go the other way. If you can actually just create a good game, then people will kind of more likely hold on to their assets, and that also increases the value of it long term as well, because they have an emotional connection to it. And we actually see that for a lot of Axies or Axie characters in our game. So a lot of the supply is actually locked up because people, they refuse to sell because they have an emotional connection to the assets themselves. So if you can kind of get there, then that's great. If you kind of fail at that, then yes, it's going to go to zero.
So maybe one way to look at it is when you design a game that is tokenized on the blockchain, you're running a small country. What happens when there's inflation, or what happens when there's deflation? The central bank steps in. They either issue more paper or they buy. So this is a paradigm shift when you're running a game. Because in the past, the only way that a game company would manage the economy is to make everything more expensive if there was too much, or they just issue more coins because it costs them nothing. In reality, again, it's like the Venezuelan economy because it's all fake. But in a blockchain game, it's real. So if the volatility is very high and it affects the economy, just like in a country, and suddenly the normal items is no more fun because it's too expensive, or it's bad because it drops too much, then the game company needs to use its reserves and step in, right? If it doesn't do it, it is not serious about blockchain, and it is not a serious participant in the joint economy, because it only really cares for itself, right? But if it cared for the players, just like a government cares for its citizens, then it will step in and do something about it. Now, the other thing is, what's beautiful about blockchain is the participants are also at interest in saving the economy, which means, much like the real government, if it's a big game economy, you can issue game bonds, right? And you can raise money from the community to do deflationary or inflationary practices. That's how we see the future. Now, those are items that do need regulation, right? Which means that when you're designing a game, you need to think about a game as a real economy and not actually just for fun.
All right, that was it for our tonight's session. Once again, thank you very much for all the presenter.